everybody. Hope you're doing marvelously well. I'm very happy, very honored to be speaking to Mr. Steve Porcaro. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks. And you?
I'm good. Thanks for having us over.
Absolutely.
I was watching a BBC interview with Steve Sacco earlier today, and I was thinking to myself, I got a lot of notes, a lot of notes here for you. And I was like, do I sit here with my cell phone and scroll through and try to memorize everything? So you very kindly printed this out for us. We've done a lot of these interviews, and you can tell a lot about a person when you first arrive. Like, the first thing you did was, like, make us coffee and tea and...
Well, it is home.
I know, but you didn't have your people do it. That's a big deal, especially for me, because my age group being a Gen Xer, like, I grew up on your albums. I bought all those albums as they came out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
That's why extensive notes.
Fantastic.
Obviously, you come from an incredibly musical family. What I found interesting, what I didn't know, is it says here in the 60s, you actually started playing drums first.
Well, we all did. Drums were around the house, my dad being a drummer. Yep. So there was always a drum set up somewhere.
For me, when people ask me, at one parent to another, what do you think my kids should learn? I always say to them, the two instruments to learn would be drums and piano. Because piano is going to teach you harmony and melody so much quicker than you would on the guitar. And drums, of course, is going to teach you all the rhythmic stuff.
I used to read interviews Chick Corea said, and he always recommended that everyone learn drums first, just as far as, learning rhythm and time and the importance of those things, even before piano or anything else.
Yep, makes absolute perfect sense. Your father gave you a Reen organ?
Ream.
Oh, Ream. Organ.
It was a company, you still see them around. They make air conditioners and things like that. Yeah, it was kind of this industrial company. Yeah, it was an epic Christmas. I was still asking for toys. At the very end there, they pulled out an organ and a small amplifier, and I just was completely blown away. I wouldn't have even imagined I could ask for that,
Yeah, if at 67, you would have been about 9 years old.
10. I think I was around 10.
But then it was traded for a Farfisa with a Leslie 147.
Yes.
How quickly did that happen?
Not quick enough, but but quick enough. When my folks and when my dad saw how serious I became about it, and with my bands, I mean, the dream was to have a Hammond. The dream was to have a Hammond, but that was way out of reach. But the Farfisa, but a Leslie on anything. A Leslie was going to make anything sound more like a Hammond. That Farfisa Professional, Sly Stone played one of those at Woodstock. It was a very cool model, and it through a Leslie preamp and Leslie speaker, it sounded amazing. So
with your brother Jeff, with David and Steve Lukather, you started a band, The Rural Still Life.
Yeah, well, no, actually, David and my brother Jeff first had a band when they were in high school. We were kind of the next generation.
Ah, I see.
They had graduated, they had moved on, and then I kind of took the band over and added Lukather. He was my age, and we met in high school, and we kind of took the band over, took the name over, and but started doing our own tunes. When I first had the band before Lukather, I actually did the same songs that they had done. Once Luke had joined the band, along with Mike Landau on guitar. I had two guitar players.
Incredible.
John Pierce on bass, Carlos Vega on drums. We kind of...
heck of a band.
Just started a heck of a band. We just played whatever we wanted to. We played the pop songs of the day that we wanted to. And a lot of... Jeff, at one point, was working on the Katy Light album with Steely Dan and bringing us home rough mixes. And we were learning those songs before the album came out and playing them live.
And you'd have been like 19 or 20 at the oldest.
What's that, me?
Yeah, or maybe
no,
even younger.
I wasn't. I was still, this is like when I was 16 years old or so.
Katy Light, 16. Wow.
Yeah, this is when I was like 15, 16. We were doing dances around the valley here.
Incredible.
Proms.
So how does that, now obviously you're working with the greatest musicians in Southern California of the time. You were a member of some of the best players.
With Toto.
What became Toto. So did you do the stuff with Gary Wright and Boz Scaggs before Toto?
Oh, yes.
So how did that come about?
Well, just thought I had just finished my first half of my senior year. And David Foster, who was a good friend of my brother Jeff's, they'd become fast friends in the studios. David Foster had just finished working on Gary's, Dreamweaver album. And Gary was looking for musicians who would go on the road, especially guys who knew how to play synth, who would go on the road. And David Foster thought of me. I wasn't out of high school yet. I hadn't even started my last semester, and I got offered a gig to play with Gary on the road, and I jumped on it. It was a dream come true.
Quite flattering, because I've worked with David, and he's a heck of a piano player himself.
He is.
Yeah.
We'd started a long working relationship with me programming for him on a lot of his... I did a lot of what he did for many years.
Do you think that was a real edge for you, being in the synth world, growing up at that time, as like every synth that came out was like revolutionary and something new was happening?
And there weren't that many at that time, you know what I mean? There wasn't really that many. But very early on, when I was, like I said, I wasn't even out of high school yet, he helped me get the gig with Gary Wright.
And then Boz Scaggs?
And then Gary's gig led directly to Boz Scaggs. Jeff and David, by this time, together with David Hungate, they kind of became a rhythm section that people hired a lot together. Louis Shelton hired them for Seals and Crofts stuff, and that kind of led from one thing to the next. And all three of them wound up working on Boz Scaggs' Silk Degrees album. Again, as soon as that album had finished, I'd been on the road with Gary. As soon as that finished, they were looking to go on the road. And that's when certain groups, to cover their overdubs, to cover their string parts and synth parts, they were looking for a second keyboard player to bring out, besides the guy who did the meat and potatoes piano parts. So it was the perfect kind of gig for me. And I jumped right into that. And that kind of became Toto.
Back in the days before everything was triggered and played off of multi-tracks. So.
Yeah, this was ARP string ensembles and mini Moogs and stuff like that.
Beautiful. So how does that lead into, later on that same year in 77, the formation of Toto?
Yeah, well, David Paich had co-written just about every song except one, I think, of Silk Degrees. Jeff was playing drums. David Hungate was playing bass. On the touring band, they added me with Boz, as well as Steve Lukather later on came on board. So Columbia, the record company we knew we wanted to be with, they pretty much saw us live with Boz, this band.
Bunch of kids, yeah.
A bunch of kids, but with David Paich being the songwriter, the one who wrote Lido Shuffle and Low Down. So they knew the songwriting power was there. And David had started doing demos with Jeff, just the two of them, started going into the recording studio, recording some demos and stuff before they had really formed a band. That became Toto. And Columbia knew what they were getting because they'd seen us as an entity with Boz. They just knew we were going to...
How did Bobby Kimball come involved?
There was a bass player from the band Three Dog Night, Joe Shermy, who was friends with David and Jeff, and they'd done some work together with him. He was in a band called SS Fools, and one of the singers in that band. There was the drummer from Three Dog Night, and a couple of the guys from Three Dog Night, as well as one of the singers was Bobby Kimball. And that's where they first heard and saw Bobby and thought he'd be perfect for Toto.
Incredible. How did Toto, the name, come up?
At that time, there was, it's really a simple story. There's a bunch of different...
That's why I'm asking, because I know lots of different
names. You know what I mean? Well, you're going to hear the truth.
Good.
Today. No, I remember very distinctly Jeff saying... There were these bands like NXS was happening right then, U2. We just wanted something simple with as few letters as possible. Something like Toto. But of course, it would never, ever be Toto. That was The Dog and the Wizard of Oz, a movie we all loved. But we just wanted something simple like that, which was kind of the style at that exact time in the late 70s. But it was never going to be Toto ever. But of course, that's what we would write on the cassettes. Anyway, the next thing you know, I'm looking at an album cover and it says Toto on it, It just kind of stuck.
I always assumed, even though it's obviously the dog from Wizard of Oz, that it actually had some kind of like African or tribal thing, that it meant something else.
Or the Latin in Toto, I mean, totality, everyone tried to, after the fact, give it more meaning. But the truth was, we just wanted something simple. Yeah. We thought In Excess, U2 We thought those were real cool names, just very simple and would look good in a logo. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, which it does.
That's what we were thinking.
It's like the lyric. Sometimes somebody, what did you mean? But really all it was is something that sang well.
Right.
So 78, debut album, Hold the Line, I'll Supply Love. The album went to number 9 in the US. That must have been pretty meteoric, because what were you, 19?
Oh, we were thrilled. We were living the dream.
19 or 20 years old?
Yeah. We were living the dream. I was just 20 or so, maybe a little, 20, 21.
That's incredible. So your song, of course, Taking It Back.
Mm-hmm.
What was the process in that? Is that something you'd written years before?
No, not at all.
Or?
Not at all. I was always wanting to write songs, but it was just David was the 800-pound gorilla in the room, in the band, as far as having the clout, being this very famous songwriter. He was just on fire in those days. You know, he'd go down the hall and write and co-produce Cheryl Lynn at the time of our first album, you know, and had a huge hit with her in his spare time from Toto. He just was on fire in those days. One day I went out into the studio. We were working in a studio called Studio 55 right next to Paramount Studios. It was Richard Perry's studio. I'd gone out into the studio and just kind of came up with this tune, kind of pretty much had written a tune while we were, I don't know what we were doing in the booth, you know, with all the equipment set up. And the very next day, David was very late coming to the session. And everyone was kind of set up waiting around. And I was like, hey, I got a tune. And I had just written it the day before.
Wonderful.
And sat at the Hammond, and we cut Taking It Back.
What a lovely 20-year-old thing to do.
Tell me about it. No, and the guys, you know, they were always David was always, as much as he always had a lot of material, they were always very encouraging for any of us to contribute writing-wise.
And then for the second album, Hydra, you co-wrote with David and Kimball, A Secret Love.
Yeah, honestly, that was pretty much my tune, you know, words and music, and they had contributed so much. I just kind of felt like I wanted to share the wealth with them.
Well, that's good. It's what keeps bands together. But now you've got some notoriety. People know who you are. So Earth, Wind and Fire, which is a big deal for me.
That was new programming for David Foster. You know, that was David Foster brought me in on just all kinds of stuff. Hall & Oates, Chicago, everything for quite a while, everything he did, he brought me along with him.
Amazing.
Know? And a lot of times for him, that's how the whole Michael Jackson thing started. Again, he had written a couple songs, had co-written a couple songs that were on the Off the Wall album. And Quincy called him in to play keyboards on his songs. And he just, in those days, would bring me along to program.
There's probably a lot of people that will understand what programming meant in those days, but actually there's probably a lot of people watching this who have no idea what that means. Mm-hmm. So programming on an album like that...
You know, for instance, it just was, there were only a couple synthesizers in those days, a Mini Moog, which, you know, had no presets, there was no buttons to push where there'd be a preset sound ready to go. You kind of had to dial them up from scratch. The CS80, which is on that, it did have presets, but, you know, they always wanted things dialed in, meaning, you know what I mean? They wanted you to kind of customize things to fit exactly the song and the sonic range that was available to you there. And
CS80, what a wonderful synth.
Incredible.
A lot of people probably wouldn't know, but the CS80 was about the price of a luxury car in those days. It was an expensive machine.
Heavy and heavy.
Yeah.
Very heavy.
You don't have one still, do you?
I do. It's in the garage. It's not set up right now.
Wonderful synth.
Mm-hmm.
I think obviously Stevie Wonder a lot for CS80 as well.
Yep. And Arturia, my friends at Arturia software company, and they also make hardware since now, make an incredible model of CS80.
Oh, they do?
That I use these days quite a bit.
Oh, wonderful. Isn't that Love's in Need of Love today? Isn't that CS80, the strings?
Well, you know, I think that was the Papa Bear of all that technology, which was this thing called a GX1, the Dream Machine.
GX1
was kind of two CS80s and more built in together.
Third album now, Turn Back, which was co-produced with Jeff Workman.
Yes.
Lukather has called it the FU album. What's your sort of take on that third album?
You know, that was a difficult period for me, but it wound up being great. That was the first time we brought in a co-producer. Mm-hmm. We brought in an engineer. We definitely wanted a much more rock and roll thing. I know Luke was very frustrated with how tame his guitar solos were and guitar sounds were with the way, with the status quo in the band at the time. And that was bringing in a rock and roll guy to give it more of an edge. He and I, at first, while we were making the record, totally bumped heads and didn't get along. But what happened from that is I wound up working on my own. I started living with David Paich during the Hydra album, and David had built a studio. I was just working to an 8-track. I was experimenting, figuring I would figure out what to do when it got time to do my synthesizers, because we produced ourselves. And so there was always all the guys were breathing down your neck. And these are, the guys in the band were such incredible musicians and were so fast. And I could be fast in the studio, which is why I worked with guys like David Foster. But with the synthesizers, I wanted to take it to another level. I wanted to, I always kind of had an idea what you could do if you really had time, more time than your typical 3-hour session. Understandably, the guys didn't want to sit around for days while I'd be tweaking or something like that. So I thought, and during the Turnback album, I thought, I'll do all my experimenting on this 8-track, and then just when it's time to do the synthesizers, do it. Well, I worked so hard at that and did all this bouncing down and did all kinds of stuff, and no one ever wound up hearing what I did. It was never able to be used because it was just an 8-track, and I would have never. I was using modular synthesizers at the time and doing things that couldn't be
reproduced
called
easily.
Up and just reproduced real quick. So it was very, very frustrating for me. But the aftermath of that was that David wound up getting a couple 24 tracks in the same exact studio. And Jeff Workman, who I had bumped heads with during the making of the Turnback album, he wound up teaching me. I asked him, if I recorded myself, why couldn't they use what I recorded? What would be I'm no engineer. I don't know. How do you know you're getting the perfect level to a piece of outboard gear? How do you know where to turn things up and down? I really had no clue. And he very patiently taught me gain structure, taught me about gain structure and zero VU, what they called zero VU at the time, as far as when and how to use your meters and where to turn what up, when. And he wound up being amazingly helpful and amazingly generous with his knowledge. Just about everything I did for Toto 4 was done at David Paich's studio, just about everything. And they used it all.
That's incredible, because that does lead us straight into the self-produced album. So you're back, you guys producing the record.
Yeah.
Yep. Toto 4, which is, inarguably one of the greatest albums ever made.
Oh, thank you.
And a huge worldwide hit. Contains absolutely massive songs. I'm sure everybody knows the songs. Rosanna, Africa, Won't Hold You Back, Waiting for Your Love. You wrote It's a Feeling and co-wrote Afraid of Love as well.
Did I?
Yeah. You don't remember?
I remember It's a Feeling. No, it was a great time. And stars aligned. Like I said, I got to do all this very, very indulgent stuff on my own, and it got to be used. You hear it in the Rosanna synth solo and in a lot of the synths on the album.
Do you feel like that the third album, the experimentation, they're trying to make it more rock, giving you freedom, realizing you need to learn all that? I mean, it's everybody pushing away, so they all come back together on the fourth album and bring a heightened level of creativity.
For me, speaking for myself, I definitely needed the growing pains of the third album to get to where I was with the fourth album.
And Lucas had got to get his rock side, so now you're all back together and pretty amazing.
Just the stars really aligned. Everything that was in balance, right at that time.
What sort of memories do you have of the record? Did you go in feeling a lot more confident because you'd done this stuff?
No, we weren't feeling confident. I mean, once we started recording, we became very confident with the material, but our backs were totally up against the wall at that point. The first album did so well. The second album, did okay, not so great. And the third album was kind of like they were thinking, have these guys peaked, with their first album or whatever, I mean, you've seen it. We've all seen it happen to enough bands. So our backs were up against the wall with the fourth album. And the first thing I think they recorded or what we started working on was Rosanna. And we all felt very good about it being something special. The stars were aligning and we were on to something.
What studio did you track most of it in? Now, obviously, you did your own keys.
Yeah, at David Page Studio, but a lot of tracks were cut at Sunset Sound, I believe, is where, like, Rosanna and those things were cut.
A favorite studio of mine.
Yeah, we all loved Sunset. It was definitely a home away from home.
Was it in Studio One, the one just through the office?
I believe some of it was, absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
I think that's where, Al Schmidt cut a lot of tracks there.
Incredible. Al was a lovely man.
Yep, he sure was.
Well, I'd like to ask you just for any memories from the fourth album. Is there any specific memories of
it was really, some very specific memories, and I was very much off on my own quite a bit.
Yep.
I would show up for a lot of the, the tracking sessions. Originally we being that we produced ourselves, all of us would be at all sessions. I mean, the poor vocal, whoever was singing, there'd be 5 guys plus an engineer, plus a second engineer sitting there, while someone's trying to sing. Eventually, people started peeling off, going, you know what, you guys got this covered. I don't need to be here right now. We started feeling confident in staying in our lanes. Like I said, a lot of the synthesizers, not all of them, some of them, there was a few things done with the band around and in conventional studios, but a whole lot of it was me by myself. You know what I mean? And I wouldn't always, a lot of times with the tracking sessions, I wasn't part of the tracking sessions. That was usually it was about getting a drum track, and it would be David Page and my brother Jeff and Hungate and Lukather. The core of the band was really, sometimes it would wind up being just my brother Jeff and David Page. It was just all about getting the drum track, and everyone overdubbing after the fact. But usually it would be the 4 of them. It would usually be the 4 core guys, but they sure didn't need me distracting them. And after a while, I didn't feel like I needed to be there the whole time. So I'd go off and do my thing. My memories were of it being a little indulgent, but yet it was the right amount of indulgence. The needle didn't get too bent too far at that time. It was a right balance of everything.
So you have a ton of pressure from the label to
deliver.
Mm-hmm. Did you deliver Rosanna and then they had a sigh of relief? And did that help, or was it still?
Yes, no, Rosanna did well. It went to number 2 on the pop charts. It was very strong. The biggest surprise was Africa being our only number 1 song. If you look at especially in those days, now maybe people don't think it matters, but when you do your running order, you have side A and side B of the record, and Africa was the last song on side B. It's not where you put anything that you think is going to be a single. And so that was a complete surprise. And we worked very, very hard on it. I remember Lukather and I both thought it shouldn't even be on the album. It was so different and so weird, and David was trying real hard to up his game lyrically, and while I worked very hard on it personally, and everyone else did, I just didn't know about it really fitting in. It helps you keep your humility about you when it winds up being the only number 1 we've ever had. Do
you think as a musician sometimes when something is simple and hooky, we sort of marginalizing it, just that bam, 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 just that very simplicity?
I just think we all get too close to stuff.
Right.
I think, that's still true. Sometimes I'm very surprised at what someone who comes in here and just hears me kind of going through some of my songs, what they go, oh, wow, that one. And I'm like, really? That one? It's always will surprise me what someone thinks really stands out.
No, I relate to that 100%. Now, obviously, Human Nature is a massive highlight of anybody's career. How did the working relationship start with Michael and Quincy?
Like I said, starting from the Off the Wall album, David Foster had brought me with him, and I kind of connected between Michael and Bruce Swedien, his engineer, and Quincy. They saw why Foster liked to have me around, and they started just calling me on my own, whether it was
Lovely.
Brothers Johnson or Donna Summer or whatever else, or Quincy's own solo records. He started calling me, both in combination with other keyboard players. Sometimes David Page would come with me, or there'd be a David Foster there, or even on my own, just as far as certain synth parts. I just started
quite a leap to a co-writer, though. It's like writing a song.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And he had been asking David Page for songs. I'd been already in the studio working with him, doing synths. And he was asking David Paich. They were looking for what wound up being Beat It. He wanted the direction he was giving David was he was looking for something like My Sharona. He wanted something real simple, rock and roll, up-tempo thing like that. I lived with David at the time, and David was working hard every night doing up-tempo grooves like that to send to Quincy. And Human Nature was just something I'd been working on my own, on the side. And even on the road, on a 4-track cassette, I'd been working on it. Quincy accidentally heard it. It was on the other side of a tape. We had sent a couple songs of David's. The auto reverse had kicked in on the cassettes in those days, and Quincy heard Human Nature, a very rough version of Human Nature, with me singing the same verse over and over again. But he really liked the vibe of it. Asked me if I would mind if the great John Bettis would come, could redo my verse lyrics, which I was completely open to, and John just knocked it out of the park. I didn't feel the need to change a syllable. I loved what he did. They kept my chorus lyrics and my title, and
incredible.
It was it really, again, stars were aligned. It came out great, and Michael was Michael, and
yes, one of the most beautiful vocals of all time.
Yes, and what he brought to the table can't be understated either. He wasn't just singing a song like I remember he was copying a lot of my phrasing, the way I was phrasing the verses and stuff, but all those things in between when the intro would come back in and he was just vocalizing, that was just all him, just feeling it and just ad-libbing and bringing it to this other level.
His groove is just insane in his vocal. I've had the opportunity to solo multi-tracks with him singing, and just everything, even if he's snapping or tapping his feet, it's in the pocket at all times. You can just leave the vocal mic open. I
remember very well working on Thriller, and like I said, I was in there a lot besides Human Nature. I was working on a lot of different things, some things that didn't make the album. Every day that I was there, that I saw, and I was there a lot, every day he would leave at a certain time to go do a vocal lesson. To go have a vocal lesson with Seth Riggs, his teacher. He was constantly working on his instrument, and I think with all the noise and all the other stuff out there, people forget just what a great singer he was. Just as far as a pure singer, what an amazing talent he was.
I was just talking earlier about going to the Vegas show, and you watch this Vegas show and you see all these people doing this incredible dancing to it. And you're like, wait, they're just trying to be him. And they're all doing a really good job. But he's also writing the songs, singing the songs, inventing the dancing that they're copying.
Yeah.
It's just otherworldly.
Grammys. Back on the Total 4 subject. The Shrine Auditorium, when you guys won, was it 5 Grammys that night?
It was more than that. I think altogether 7 or something like that. Luke also won that night for Turn Your Love Around, Best R&B song. It was a fruitful time. I mean, we all didn't win 7. There was like engineer awards and stuff, arrangement awards that went to Jerry Hay and David and the people involved. But the band got Producer of the Year, which was astounding, meaning that, guys like Gary Katz, with Donald Fagen's solo album, and David Foster and Quincy, and that was a little weird for us. But, we got Record of the Year for Hosanna and Album of the Year for Total 4. It was an amazing night.
And very well deserved.
Thank you.
But what an incredible time for music. That whole period you're working on, a handful of the biggest albums of all time.
It was crazy. Like I said, the stars were really aligned in a big way. You know what I mean? That's when I started working with Don Henley, too, working on Dirty Laundry, working with him and Danny Cooch and Greg Ladani, and it just was an amazing period.
Yeah, looking at I'm presuming a lot of these are David Foster stuff, so because you're working on Winners, Brothers Johnson?
No, that wasn't David Foster, and that was, I had a song on Winners. I had worked with George and his brother before with Quincy. They actually came, George actually came to a Toto rehearsal, and I had a song called In the Way I had started. I wound up finishing it with my brother Jeff and David Paich, and that wound up on the Winners album. And he let me do my modular synth thing to it.
And the Chicago 16 album?
Yeah, it was all with Foster. All the Chicago stuff was with David.
The Donna Summer album in 82?
With Quincy.
Yep. I remember that album well. Friends in Love, Dionne Warwick, Don Henley, Al Jarreau, Diana Ross. I mean, you were busy. Jackson's, Kenny Loggins, Roger Hodgson, John Anson, Quincy Jones, Jefferson Airplane. Did you sleep much?
No. Therein lied the problem sometimes.
Yeah? I mean, you were what, 20?
I was in my 20s.
25, 26?
Mm-hmm. It was a very a busy time.
And then you still got in to do the 5th album, Isolation.
And the 6th album.
And the 6th album. But now with an addition of another Porcaro.
Yes. Well, Mike joined up with us right when Toto 4 ended. David Hungate had kind of decided that, the whole making an album, and believe me, we loved being in the studio. Studios where we were all very comfortable. So we'd be in there for 9 months making a record, and then to tour, the rehearse, and then tour. We weren't home much. And even when we were home, we weren't home much. We were in the studio. Right. Kind of working day and night. So, and David wanted a different life. So after the 4th album, and he was just amazing on the 4th album, my brother Mike took over and did the tour for the 4th album right away and continued on with the band.
You guys worked on David Lynch's Dune movie. Was that sort of your first foray into film and TV composition?
It was. The best part of that experience was working with David Lynch. We were kind of treading water before. Looking back, I think we all regret not having struck while the iron was hot, so to speak, after the success of Toto 4. We'd been working so hard up to that point. I think in some ways we needed a breather, we needed some rest, which in some ways we needed, and in other ways it wasn't a good idea. Some of us had too much time on our hands. Anyway, we wound up, in the meantime, working on the movie Dune. We were all fans, especially Luke, and a lot of the guys were fans of director David Lynch. We thought this could be very, very cool. You know what I mean? And we always, especially David and I, had an interest in working to film, but it wound up being weird. The best part was hanging out with David Lynch for a good month or so. You know what I mean? That was the most interesting part of it all. But it was hard for us to be in a supportive role like that. We were kind of used to
being the big rock star.
Everyone sitting down and listening to our music turned up real loud. And the fact that there was, this pesky dialogue that needed to be louder than us was...
But even though the movie wasn't a commercial success, it has become a massive cult movie now. So association with something, and it's a beautiful movie to watch.
Yeah,
so.
and the music, which was mostly David Page, has aged well. People
very well.
People like it.
Yeah, I agree. So you're working on the 6th album, the 7th album, the 7th one.
The 6th album was Fahrenheit, and that was my last album as an official band member. Right. I kept touring for another couple years, and I was there in the capacity I used to be way back in the day of just being like a programmer for David Page and helping David out. I wasn't a band member, so I didn't worry about having my mark. You have to understand, I initially was asked to be in the band. In reality, it was kind of to do what I had done with Boz Scaggs and stuff, was to kind of be in a supportive role for David, to be able to cover his synthesizer overdubs live. That's really why I was asked to be in the band, in all reality. To program for him in the studio. And
very humble of you.
And no, it's not humble at all. It really was, at the time of the start of the band.
Yeah,
that's why I was asked to be in there. It wasn't because of my songwriting or anything else. And they saw me with Gary Wright, how I could handle synthesizers, and go,
sure,
this is definitely going to be a part of the live thing, is being able to. But David was the one doing all the synthesizer overdubs at the time, and he just wanted someone that could handle that stuff live. And but of course, my I wasn't going to be happy just doing that, and my role in the band kept expanding. You know what I mean? And I was the one expanding it for the most part. So it kind of reached a point where, especially, the guys were wanting to kind of get back to basics and make things a lot rawer. All of a sudden, soon after Toto 4, that whole kind of big production, what people in a derogative way called corporate rock, became very unpopular. People wanted more real band sound, more real of a band sound. And I was all about the arrangements and the overdubs and the synth extravaganzas and stuff like that. I thought it was time to move on, and it was very, very amicable. There was there were no ugly scenes associated with it, thank God. I just felt like it was time to move on. And I still went back to, starting with the seventh one, went back to being, it being just a supportive role with David.
What was interesting about that album is it didn't do well in the US at all, but did really well in the rest of the world.
Yeah, it was a lot of the guys' favorite albums. Favorite album. It's where Joseph really kind of found his place in the band and did amazing work.
Yeah, interesting kind of dynamic. The 90s is just a ton of session work. Yes, Jude Cole, Isley Brothers, Michael Jackson on his story, Christina Aguilera. I mean, you're a busy man.
Yeah, but I kind of, that was me kind of tailing off a little bit from doing it owning me like it did, the work owning me. I still managed to keep busy, but that's when I kind of started delving into some film work, of my own.
Pressures of film, though. I've only done a very limited amount, but I have a lot of friends in that world. How much freedom do you feel that you're given your track record as a member of an incredibly successful band, having written songs like Human Nature, or are they hiring you for being you?
No, yeah, well, yeah, no, the things I was getting, and my whole film career was due to my friend James Newton Howard, who was doing very well in that world. And he helped me get into it. No, they didn't care anything about.
That's what I wondered.
They had seriously, they really didn't care about what I had done. Especially, like I say, Toto, to musicians and to our fans, we get a lot of love. There was kind of a next generation that kind of saw us as kind of, you know what I mean?
But yeah, early 90s.
Of a certain time.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way.
Grunge and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I kind of never really I always felt when I was doing film work, I was kind of being a watered down version of the temp score of someone else. But I loved doing the work. I absolutely loved it. I loved the process. I loved the discipline of it, which we didn't have in the band. Producing ourselves, we never really had firm deadlines. We'd add another month onto our recording schedule. We'd add another week or two onto our mixing schedule. So when James Howard, who I'd been helping with on some of his film scores, doing some synthesizer work, when he one day kind of turned to me and said, "Hey, do you want to try this?" And I was like, "You mean writing the film, like doing a TV show or something?" And he says, "Yeah, do you want to give it a go?" I was like, I don't know if I could have music done by Thursday. I've never had to. You know what I mean? Even my songwriting was just,
when inspiration struck.
Yeah, and I just was always, I never was very disciplined. It was always loosey-goosey. Starting songs was easy, but finishing them was a whole nother story. And what film taught me was that not only could I deliver on a deadline, but I loved it. It just kind of forced me to grow up and to realize that sometimes when you come in here, as much as I love my work and as lucky as you are to have it, sometimes it's work. Sometimes you'd rather go out to dinner with your friends or do something with your family, and it's work. It can be difficult. That third verse lyric, that finishing that overdub, figuring out that string part can sometimes be work. It's not always all fun and games, like most of it can be.
But you can't get away from Toto. 92, you contributed to Kingdom of Desire.
Yeah, I always contributed. I never was very far away from helping David. David Page has always been incredibly generous to me, and in many, many ways. I kind of would always be there for him when he asked.
That was Lucas's album as a lead singer.
Kingdom of, yeah, it was. Yeah, that's really an incredible album.
So you've done session work with Yes, as I presume that's what led to the Chris Squire experiment.
Yeah, the session stuff I did with Yes, I was always a very, very hardcore fan. They were huge to me. My brother Jeff hit me to Yes, starting with the second album that, this is even before, the Yes album. starting with their second album. Jeff had their second album, and I loved them. I wound up being, never missing a concert here. Close to the Edge to me is still one of the all-time most amazing pieces of work. That for me is is a Prague high point, and just easily one of my all-time favorite records. My work with them was related to, they were at a strange period in between after the Trevor Rabin period, which I loved, Trevor's stuff. I loved how they made a hit single, and it still was Yes. Yeah. A lot of hardcore Yes fans may beg to differ that it wasn't, you know what I mean? If it's not Steve Howe, it's not classic Yes. The way Trevor Horn produced it and stuff, it was an amazing record and very unique and very cool. But when I was involved, it was at a very strange in-between time for them, and I was more involved through this producer, John Anderson was working with Jonathan Elias. So I know, like Rick Wakeman and some of my heroes, some guys in the band don't look fondly at that period of the Union album and the fact that LA session musicians were involved. But it was more my relationship with Billy Sherwood, who had been working with Chris a lot, that led to the Chris Squire experiment. And that was just amazing, working with him and Alan.
Did you guys play a lot of shows?
We did like a California tour. We did like 10 gigs.
Oh.
It was amazing. It was so cool, because those guys were just such heroes of mine, and they were absolute sweethearts.
I wish I was in the UK at the time, but you didn't come, so.
Yeah, I wish we did. Yeah. I wish we did. I loved doing those shows. I loved playing with them. I loved working with Chris. I loved Chris being able to sing lead.
So getting back to your film and TV composition, you did Justified, Father of the Bride, Beatmaster 2, For Love of Money, Robin Hood, Men in Tights, which is...
Did I? No, I don't know what, maybe a song of mine or something
Probably
wound up on one of those. But
Probably.
Justified was the last series I did. That was the last piece of work, and it was, what a great, that was a wonderful experience. I had
great series.
Graham Yost and the people involved, the producers involved, just treated me incredibly well. I was very lucky. They really ran interference for me. With TV, there's a lot of committee, there's a lot of production partners, and sometimes it's very easy to get conflicting input from the studio as opposed to what the producers want. And they, Graham Yost and his guys were amazing. I did a lot of that with Mark Bonilla, a friend of mine, guitar player, a friend of mine, helped me out a lot with that. Did all my guitars and helped me compose a few cues every week.
Wonderful. More session work? David Garfield, Celine Dion, George Benson.
Yeah.
You looked puzzled for a second. I was like,
no, because I think that was earlier. I think some of that might have been earlier.
Yeah, got us all lumped in 2000s.
Yeah.
So
Justified led directly to. I did Justified for a couple of years on my own, and that led directly to me starting to tour with Toto again in 2010.
2010, 2015. It's Toto 14.
Wow. Yeah.
And you wrote and sang Little Things, and you co-wrote and sung. As well. Yeah,
I wasn't officially a band member, but when they did go in to do a record, they kind of made it appear that I was, you know what I mean? And it was great. It was great. They treated me very, very well, Luke and the guys. It was really fun to kind of go out. I thought my touring days were completely behind me, and it was fun to go out, work with bands like Yes and
Mike McDonald. You did that tour together too.
Yeah, there were a lot.
First and only solo album, Someday, Somehow.
Yes.
That's a long time in the making, 2016.
Tell me about it. And it's been 6 years. I think I have enough, what I call low-hanging fruit, to, I think I'm finally going to do a follow-up. Finally.
Are you going to make it another all-star album like you did with the previous one?
Yeah, probably. I mean, when you say all-star, do you mean just calling friends together?
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Your friends are stars to us.
Then yes. I mean, that's the only way I get things done. Singing is very difficult for me, and I only want to sing things that there's really no one else to sing. Kind of like how it was with Toto. I would have loved to have had someone else singing my songs, but I never could imagine any of the other guys. Bobby Kimball completely amazed me on the second album with Secret Love. I never would have thought in a million years that Bobby would sing that song, and he The only way that got done was by me not being in the room when he did it. I was out running an errand, and he
quickly snuck it in.
He was there at the studio that I was working at, and him and this engineer, producer type Reggie Fisher, a friend of mine, they did the vocal on Secret Love without me around, and all the backgrounds and all the harmonies, and I came home and just was blown away. So yeah, I'd like to think of myself more as a songwriter than someone who has to sing his own songs. You know, I have a very limited voice.
Have you been demoing ideas, or you actually started recording?
Yeah. No, I got well, see, that's the thing now, is that
it's the same thing, isn't it?
It is now. It didn't used to be that way, but now it's very much the demos all kind of become the masters now, don't they?
So after Fahrenheit, do you feel like you would just, because you alluded to it earlier in our conversation when I said you were so busy, you were working, you know, in 1 year you were working on, I don't know how many albums, but a lot. And they were all high pressure, high profile records. Do you feel like that was a build up into 87 with Fahrenheit, and you just needed to take some time away?
No,
from
it was
pressure?
really my time in the band had kind of run its course. Like I said, you know, the guys would be talking about we need to scale down and have less of these extravagant arrangements, and they were kind of talking about exactly what I did in the band. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was kind of me taking the hint, you know. No one ever kicked me out, so to speak. And like I said, and I wound up doing a couple tours after that, helping them pull off the earlier stuff, you know what I mean, live. And it was really the style, you know, by this time Nirvana and grunge had kind of become very popular. Just a very much more scaled down, less produced style of music was what was on the charts. And you know, at the time, you know, you're just trying to make your record company happy so that they give you a budget to do another one. You know, and overnight, our style of, you know, what was naturally what these six guys did, you know, soon after Toto 4, that style of records had become kind of unpopular.
Oh, I forgot. You did the synth arrangement, of course, didn't you, on The Girl Is Mine?
That was with, yes, I mean, with David Foster, you know, with David Foster. That was me doing synths with David on The Girl Is Mine.
What's that dynamic with the two of you working together?
Oh, it was great. Since when I went to the 5th grade here, very close by from where we are right now, you know, I thought I was pretty much hot for a 5th grader, you know, as far as how I could play piano. And there was this other kid there, Peter Rylick, who just was a true child prodigy, just blew my mind and blew me away in every way musically. Instead of him being competition or a rivalry, he became my best friend, you know.
Beautiful. Very smart.
I wanted to know what he knew. I wanted to learn the pieces of music that he was playing that was blowing my mind. I took from his aunt who had taught him,
I said, I hope people hear this.
Yeah, I hope they do too.
Yes, that's a very, very good message.
Well, and it's always been the case with a David Foster. I was never in competition. I remember when I was in high school and I saw my brother Jeff. I saw his career take off right out of high school. I saw my brother Mike's career take off right out of high school, and I knew I was into the synth thing. But when I was looking out there, and there's David Paich and David Foster and Michael O'Mardian and these keyboard players, I was nowhere near. I was never that good of a student. I never had any kind of jazz chops. I was nowhere near the kind of musician that were doing the meat and potatoes keyboard parts on these sessions that my brothers were doing. I just luckily saw, especially at that time in the 70s, that there was this niche. A lot of the really good keyboard players, synthesizers were, you know, some of them could fool around with them, but in the studio when there's a lot of pressure to get sounds and stuff, there was this niche there. There was this gap between the guys who could really play and the nerds with the pocket protectors who really knew how to work synths. You know what I mean? And I kind of
fit in the middle.
I saw this gap there, and I jumped in and made friends with the David Paiches and David Fosters, and was made myself real handy to have around.
I mean, I remember when the DX7 came out, and it has this tiny little screen like
Nightmare.
this. and people would get paid thousands of dollars to program sounds on the DX7.
That's when I kind of, I started looking for, you know what I mean, guys like Bo Tomlin and some other guys who are really good at that. Anyway, I saw this gap there. And so with guys like David Foster, I was never in competition. I always loved working with other keyboard players, especially ones that were much better than me. David Paich and I were a team. When we'd walk in on a session, whether it was with Quincy or Don Henley or whoever, between the two of us, we were going to get stuff done, you know? If you needed jazz piano playing, Dave, you're in, you know, and Paich had it covered. Meat and potatoes piano parts, Paich had it covered. You needed a synth part and needed the sound dialed in. I was right there to do the things David didn't want to. It wasn't ever a competitive thing. I always loved working with other keyboard players because then I didn't feel inadequate if there was something needed that wasn't really in my wheelhouse, keyboard-wise.
Nerdy question. Do you think in terms of manuscript or your performance?
You know, both. Back there was a time where I used to write out everything, you know, especially using, earlier sequencers and stuff. There needed to be a point of reference for me anyway. I kind of came from that school. I never was a great reader. I never was a great sight reader. I could plow my way through just about anything, you know, and eventually get it under my fingers. But, you know, a combination of both. But then I could also, you know, think quick on my feet. And there'd be those sessions where they'd kind of want you to improvise a string arrangement, you know what I mean, within an hour and stuff. And I used to get frustrated. That was why I kind of wanted to start doing it at home, because I'd go, you know, if I could take the time to write this out and think about it, I actually learned how to write for strings, you know what I mean? And if I could take some time and map it out on a manuscript, it would be a lot better than just what I'm going to come up with here on the session. But for this session, you learn. You'll do a single line, and then we'll just do some pads here, and that'll be the string arrangement.
I think a lot of British people get frustrated when they come here because the business is
well, you know what?
Bigger than the
Those
creativity.
same things frustrate me.
Yeah,
those same things frustrate me.
It's what I'm
This
sensing.
is why, especially when we were talking about how demos now, I can't tell you how many sessions I would do. And what are they doing? They're playing me, right? They'd be playing me someone else's stuff. But then it would even be, you know, David and I, you know, Paich and I would be working, we'd be working in his studio, and we'd get something really cool up, and we'd go, quick, just hit the 2-track or hit the cassette, record this, you know?
Yeah.
And then flash to a week later when we're actually doing the song for real.
Yeah.
For the band's record, and they're playing me my own stuff that I recorded and going, let me hear what you're doing now. No, you're not quite there yet. Let's hear the tape. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And where now it would just be solo the track, and it's there.
Yeah.
You know, that's why David and I, and Paich was very aware of this frustration. That's why even our demos at the Manor wound up going straight to 24-track. Everything would be
very smart. Yeah.
Separate tracks. No more 4-track cassettes and 8 tracks and this. We'd go to the last few years that I'd, you know, be working at David's. Everything went to, and some of that stuff it's been like, thank God we did that. We've got there's some great magical moments that were captured that would have typically been on a demo we'd be listening to going, God, if only, you know, we were spoiled that way. You know, this is part of David's, generosity and whatever, is that at his studio where I worked, where I was kind of entrenched, you know, there was a closet there was always plenty of reels of blank tape. You know, this tape was at least $120 a reel, you know what I mean? But to David, tape was cheap.
It's got great ideas on it. It's cheap.
Tape's cheap, you know, to David. And believe me, there was a lot of bullshit I recorded onto straight to 24-track, but there was also some very cool things that we're so glad we have the vocals separate.
Do you have that demo of Human Nature anywhere?
Oh, yeah. You know, that's all over the internet, the Human Nature. You can hear exactly what Quincy Jones heard. It's all over the internet.
Okay. Well, we're going to find it.
Oh, yeah. Just Human Nature demo.
Yeah.
Google it. Yeah, there's something floating around. I used to get asked to do these Michael Jackson fan events, and I would play a song of Michael's that I did with him at David's, and it just went straight to 24 track, and thank God, because I've since completely redone this since. He came over one day and just said, I remembered there were a lot of people there, and he was uncomfortable with all the people that were hanging out. And they were outside the studio, but we just went into the studio, and he did 9 vocal passes on this thing that I'd come up with. It was just some synth jam I had, and he had written some words on top of it. He came in and just did 9 vocal passes in a row without stopping. We didn't talk about it. We didn't discuss anything. He did a lead vocal. He did a double. He did background parts. He did harmonies, doubled, and then split, and then walked out.
So it was there for about 45 minutes and done.
I'm telling you.
Yeah,
and thank God it was done. We were going to 24 track, because I wound up pretty much replacing everything else in the track, but I've got this finished lead vocal of his,
Incredible.
Yeah. I'll play it for you later if you want to hear it.
I want to hear it. Definitely want to hear it. Can we do a little sort of talk about some gear?
Sure. The whole MIDI thing is something I use quite a bit, and they've actually improved it quite a bit. The MIDI input.
Yeah, you see this one.
They've actually improved it by, supposedly 15%, but that's a lot, in that world.
Yeah.
In that world. And,
yeah, absolutely.
I've got it down, or I'll do my piano with just with a sample or something over there, but then I immediately send it over here and record it, and it just sounds, it's got that air. Just no sample comes close to, even these aren't like great microphones by any stretch. It always sounds better.
What other mics?
These were made by the Marshall amplifier people.
Oh, the MXLs, is that right?
I don't even know. I've had them for years. Charlie Bolus, my studio tech.
Charlie's a wonderful guy.
Told me to, years ago, he said, get these mics. They're cheap, and because I'd love to have a bunch of Neumanns laying around, but I need to have stuff that can fall over without me getting a heart attack. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah. Especially when you're working on your own.
Especially when I'm working on my own, and microphones fall over. Around me, it seems.
No, I understand. You're running backwards and forwards, wearing multiple hats. That's when things fall over.
Yes,
makes perfect sense.
No, and as far as the piano too, this you're able to, I can just completely use it as a MIDI controller.
Oh wow!
And nothing. I don't care. There's no company has come close to recreating the feel of this. I mean, not even close.
Beautiful.
By any stretch of the imagination. So for certain things, pianistic things, I'll use this.
Right. Yeah. There's a bounce to it that just
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But then when you came up on the Ream organ and the Farfisa, it's the exact opposite. It's just Yeah.
Of course.
What was that like? Being an early pioneer of synths. I mean, although the CS did have a kind of an aftertouch thing, didn't it?
The CS80 and the GS1. The GS1 had an amazing aftertouch. It's funny. Human Nature, you can hear on the in the demo and stuff. You could hear the poly aftertouch. That was so great, where you can hit a note, and then long after the fact, you could just bring out one note, holding a pad. And that was easier said than done. There was a lot of things. I had the thing called a Kurzweil MIDI board, especially with MIDI, it seemed, that had poly aftertouch. But as far as the execution of it, when it actually got down to doing it, a lot of times, and it had all these editing features, had many ways to edit it and control the curve and the response and the sensitivity. And for some reason, there just was something incredibly magical about the CS80 and the GS1.
Did you have a GS1?
Oh yeah, several. As a matter of fact, yeah. David, we had a great relationship with Yamaha.
Do you still have a GS1?
I don't. I'm embarrassed to say. It was one of the few things I let go of. We had 3 of them in the warehouse. The batteries had leaked and had supposedly ruined the motherboards. And I was told that they were useless, and came to find out that they weren't. There were people that could have rebuilt them for me. So that's one of the few things that I ever got rid of. I regret.
You could buy a house with one of those now. They're so valuable now, aren't they?
Yeah, no, and Yamaha was so, at that time, they were very generous. And I was helping them get them to other artists. And, I was in the studio with Quincy a lot. We got Quincy One and Joe Zawinul, and Yamaha was being really, really amazing to me back in those days. And they still are, by the way.
Yeah, we have a great relationship with them as well on the guitar side.
Yeah.
Wonderful company.
Yeah.
So you've got a couple of gold and platinum records up here.
A couple, yeah. Yeah. No, it was nice touring with the guys because they kind of gave us very generously gave us some of these awards, kind of combining a bunch of them. So, some looked getting worse for a tear. This is from Off the Wall. This was actually a piece of the wall from the album cover.
Oh, wow.
So
only a few people got that. Yeah. Where was the wall?
I have no idea. I was at some photo shoot or something. You can see it's just a thin, but that's actual brick in there.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
What a beautiful record to be involved in.
Yeah, it was great.
I mean, it's like Thriller's the album with all the hits and one of the greatest albums ever, but this is just a masterpiece.
It really holds a special place in people's hearts, that particular record, I just worked on 2 songs with David Foster, the ones David Foster co-wrote.
2 songs more than most people.
Right. Right.
Absolutely beautiful. I suppose the other thing to sort of catch up on, I know, like you said, you have a fairly simple setup, and you didn't say there was a lot to talk about, but you have a couple of, pieces. Obviously, a focus of the room is these beautiful ATCs. What have you been through to get to the point where these became your speakers?
For the longest time, I was, especially doing film work, I was, putting in those long, long hours. I was always working on Yamaha bookshelf speakers of some kind or another, something based on an NS10, or they wound up having some ones that were a little more robust and not so delicate. I had reached a point when I was working with the guys in the studio again. I was like, I miss what we used to, the bigs. I miss working on big speakers. That was the thing about, working in a real recording studio, was these amazing monitors they had. And I'd reached a point where I was like, why can't I have that? How much is it to have bigs? And I actually we had in our warehouse, in the Toto warehouse, big Reds and some Altecs and some things that used to be what we listened to when we were listening to big speakers. When I would bring them in here, it seemed no matter what I do, it just wasn't sounding like I remembered romantically them sounding. Mm-hmm. And come to find out that a lot of those big speakers need to be softened. Part of what made them sound the way they did was they needed to be built into the wall in a certain way. And I was even willing to have to bust out and make soffits in my wall form if I wanted to. But then someone, Charlie Bolus, our mutual friend,
wonderful talent,
hit me to these ATCs and said, these are made to stand alone like this. I can crank them up as loud as I want. So I get that thing that I was looking for, that power, that being able to...
But maintaining a kind of a hi-fi sound, like something...
And it really maintains a hi-fi sound, very, very flat. There's no controls on the back of there to mess with. It just kind of... They do what they do, and I absolutely love it.
Beautiful.
And I'm able to crank them up as loud as I want without... ever getting near to distorting anything. Yeah.
So you have mic pre's, you've got a couple of Brent Aviel 1272s.
Yep, some mic pre's, and you know what I mean? My Russian Dragon, just syncing up Ableton Live and Logic. Sometimes I like to have a point of reference. That was actually retired quite a long time ago, and I just pulled it out. I mean, I have a few synths in there, but for me, it's all about...
Soft synths now?
Yeah, it's all about songwriting these days. A lot of people are disappointed when they find out how many soft synths I use. But, to be able to just call up a song and have all the synthesizers come up exactly where I left them is just...
And you're a big fan of Arturia, you were mentioning earlier?
Sure. But just, for me, it's all about that. I went through those years of having to write down and document and take pictures of the front panel settings and trying to recreate stuff, get back to where I was. And especially with film work, when you're having to jump from, and the way I work, I don't start something and then finish it. I kind of get so far in it and then I need to look away. And maybe jump to something else. So I'm always, and even in my songs, I'm jumping from one thing to the other to recreate what I did, to line up all the different synth sounds and all that. I've done it the hard way, and sure, there's a difference between some of these soft synths and the real thing. But for me, the bottom line being, songwriting and the fact that life is short. It's
recallability.
Yeah, recallability, and the fact that life is as short as it can be, and the fact that my face has been rubbed in that fact. I choose to, whatever differences there is, suffer with it, and at the expense of being able to have more output.
I hear you. We all like to wax lyrically about the good old days and everything.
Sure.
However, whenever I ask, guys that have been making records for 40 or 50 years, they're always like, oh, I wish I'd had this then.
There used to be a very real debate back and forth about analog tape versus digital. That was an active discussion between a lot of people. And have you noticed it's kind of gone away, that discussion. I know what it sounds like to hit analog tape hard and that natural compression. I used to rely on that. I love that sound. More and more people are, they're doing blindfold tests and they're having to admit, you like that analog type compression. There's a plugin that works pretty good that'll give you that. When you're a home studio owner and you don't have a maintenance crew, and I remember what it was like to have to forget aligning the tape machine. What about aligning the Dolby and getting different tapes in from different people and what you'd have to go through? It's keep the change to me. If you hear the difference and it's that important to you, by all means, do it. It just isn't. These are more tools for my songwriting now. And if something happens to be magical and something happens to be someone wants to use it, great. We can put it on a separate track. We can output all the individual outputs and it can be used.
Beautiful. Any particular favorite vocal mic or anything?
No, I wish I had a better collection of vocal mics. I'd love to have a Neumann. I'd love to have a bunch of Neumanns to pick from. David Page has always been very sweet and offered, whenever I'm doing something really special, I'll borrow a mic from David or a friend. The things I use, what is that, an Opus or some of this stuff that I use, my heart doesn't stop if it gets knocked over accidentally or something like that.
Yeah, you're running backwards and forwards to the piano and you trip over a cable.
Those things happen.
Those things happen, yeah.
Those things happen. Someday, I want to get a Shep. I want to get a couple Shep's mics for the piano, and that's definitely an area where I can stand for some improvement as far as, you're always trying to, it's the home studio, but you're always trying to up what the default is. You know what I mean? What you walk in on. You're always trying to improve that. And there's always room for improvement.
But it makes me think of the famous Quincy quote, which is the most important thing is the song, and the song.
There you go. Right? And that's what I'm the most interested in doing. And all this stuff just kind of helps me. And the fact that I happen to have some ATC sitting there, it's...
Yeah, well, you definitely didn't cheap out on the speakers.
I'm a very lucky man.
Yeah, you definitely went for the highest level on the speakers.
And also them being flat, you know what I mean? Doing film work, you're right away, your stuff, you're hearing it in other places, and you want it. Doing film work, you want there to be a consistency. You don't want to be hyping yourself at home, and then all of a sudden you're at the dub stage going, why isn't it sounding the same? You know what I mean?
Right.
I've always wanted things to be very flat. From one place to the other, to make sure what I'm hearing is what I'm going to hear elsewhere. And guys like Charlie Bolus have helped keep me honest in that department. And Charlie highly recommended these.
I believe it.
And it was my Christmas present to myself a couple of years ago.
Steve, thank you ever so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
That was absolutely amazing.
My pleasure.
I hope you all enjoyed it. Please leave a bunch of comments and questions below. I'd love to come back and do more of these.
Sure.
If you can handle me.
You know where I am.
I do now. Thanks, everyone. So long. Farewell.
Take care.
Auf Wiedersehen. Au revoir. Adios. Tschüss. Tschüss. Goodbye.